"Get her away from him," the head guard roared, his hand dropping to the hilt of his silver-laced blade. In the center of the sprawling marble throne room, the Alpha King's 5-year-old son bared his fangs. A feral, guttural growl ripped from the boy's throat, his golden eyes locked purely on Luna. She was nothing here, a rejected Omega, a mere floor scrubber with lie-burned hands and invisible scars on her soul. Alpha King Cassian half rose from his obsidian throne, a command of absolute, crushing dominance dying on his lips. He watched, paralyzed by an impossible sight. Instead of scrambling backward, Luna didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, the Omega knelt on the cold, unforgiving stone. She lowered her head, exposing her vulnerable throat, and let him close the distance, his tiny, sharp teeth snapping just inches from her jugular. The collective gasp of the assembled nobility sucked the oxygen from the cavernous hall. High lords and ladies of the northern court froze in their velvet and furs, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Leo, the sole heir to the most brutal and powerful pack in the hemisphere, was trapped in a terrifying half-shift. His small fingernails had extended into sharp dark talons, tearing at the knees of his silken trousers. His jaw was locked, trembling with a primal rage that a 5-year-old mind could not comprehend, let alone control. Luna remained perfectly still. Her knees ached against the polished marble, the dampness of her scrubbing rag seeping into the coarse wool of her servant's dress. She did not raise her eyes to the furious, trembling child, nor did she look past him to the towering figure of Alpha King Cassian, whose very presence radiated a suffocating aura of winter air and burning embers. "Pray," her instincts screamed at her. "Run!" But Luna was an Omega. Her core, battered and broken as it was by her past, was fundamentally woven with the threads of pacification and deep, resonant empathy. She recognized the scent rolling off the feral prince. It wasn't the scent of a predator preparing to kill. It was the sour, sharp stench of absolute terror. "Leo," Cassian's voice rumbled, a sound that vibrated the stained glass windows towering high above them. It was an alpha command, laced with a father's desperate plea. "Stand down, now!" The boy flinched at the heavy timbre of his father's voice, whimpering as his golden eyes darted wildly. The command was too heavy for his fractured mind. He lunged again, a desperate, cornered animal. "Guard!" a noble woman shrieked. Luna moved then, not away, but forward. Ignoring the explicit rule never to touch the royal family, she raised her scarred, soap-chapped hands and gently caught the boy by his forearms. Her touch was lighter than a falling leaf. "Shh," Luna breathed, her voice a soft, melodic contrast to the harsh acoustics of the hall. "I know, little one. I know it's too loud. I know the dark is too heavy," Leo thrashed, his small claws digging into the sleeves of her dress, breaking the skin beneath. A sharp sting flared in her forearms, but Luna did not pull back. Instead, she leaned into the pain, subtly releasing her scent. She had kept it heavily suppressed, masked by harsh cleaning chemicals and ashes for 2 years, but now she let a fraction of it slip through her barriers. It was the scent of sun-warmed earth, dried lavender, and rain, a grounding, purely maternal Omega pheromone. The change was instantaneous. Leo's frantic thrashing slowed. The guttural growls hitched in his throat, dissolving into wet, jagged gasps. He pressed his face against the crook of her neck, his sharp teeth hovering right over her pulse point. He didn't bite. Instead, he opened his mouth and breathed her in, his small, rigid body suddenly going entirely limp against her chest. Silence fell over the room. It was thick, suffocating, and absolute. Luna wrapped her arms around the boy, cradling his head against her shoulder. She rocked him slightly, a rhythmic, instinctual sway. The feral beast had vanished, leaving only an exhausted, weeping child clinging to a servant's stained apron. Footsteps echoed like thunderclaps against the marble, slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly heavy. Luna kept her head bowed, staring at the polished tips of midnight leather boots as they came to a halt, inches from her knees. The pressure in the air increased tenfold, pressing against her eardrums, forcing her wolf to submit to the overwhelming dominance of the Alpha King. "Look at me," Cassian ordered. His voice was no longer a shout, but a lethal, quiet rasp. Luna tightened her hold on the sleeping prince and slowly tipped her chin upward. She met the gaze of King Cassian. His eyes were a piercing, glacial blue, swirling with a tempest of confusion, relief, and deep-seated suspicion. He stood at 6'4", a mountain of dark velvet and hardened muscle, a ruler who had conquered territories with a mere wave of his hand. Yet, in this moment, looking down at the discarded Omega holding his broken heir, the great Alpha King looked entirely undone. "Clear the hall." Cassian didn't raise his voice, but the command whipped through the room like a physical shockwave. The high lords and ladies of the Northern Court didn't dare hesitate. There were no murmurs of protest, no lingering glances. Within 60 seconds, the grand double doors of the throne room slammed shut, leaving an echoing emptiness behind. Only the king's 4 elite guards remained, stationed at the far corners of the room, their expressions carved from stone. Luna remained on the floor, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the young prince warming her collarbone. Her legs were beginning to fall asleep, a dull prickling sensation spreading through her calves, but she dared not shift her weight. To move abruptly could wake him. To wake him might invite the feral panic back into his blood. Cassian stared down at her, his jaw tight. A muscle ticked near his temple. For 3 years, since the brutal ambush at the southern border that had claimed his mate, Queen Alara, his sun had been shattered. Leo had stopped speaking. He rarely slept. And worst of all, his wolf had fractured, leaving him trapped in terrifying, uncontrollable half-shifts whenever a sudden noise or scent triggered his trauma. No healer, no high-ranking pack physician, and certainly no noble caregiver had been able to soothe him. They only managed to sedate him. And yet, this girl, a nobody, a woman who smelled of bleach and floor wax, had done what the finest medical minds in the continent could not. "Who are you?" Cassian demanded softly, crouching down so he was eye-level with her. Up close, the king was devastatingly imposing. His dark hair was slightly mussed from the stress of the morning court, and the sharp lines of his face were shadowed with exhaustion. "Luna, your majesty," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. She kept her gaze respectfully fixed on his collar, avoiding direct eye contact. It was the law of the pack, but more importantly, it was a survival mechanism she had learned the hard way. "Look at me when I strip you of your rank, you worthless wretch." The memory flared in the back of her mind, a sharp, stinging fragment of her past. Rain lashing against her face, the sneer of her former alpha, the mate who was supposed to protect her, standing before their entire pack and declaring her weak, broken, and rejected. The physical pain of the severing bond had dropped her to her knees in the mud, much like she was kneeling now. She had fled into the night, a rogue Omega, until she found asylum in the lowest servant ranks of King Cassian's fortress. "Just Luna?" Cassian asked, his eyes narrowing. He leaned in a fraction of an inch. His senses were razor-sharp. He was searching for her scent, trying to peel back the harsh chemical smell that clung to her clothes. "No pack name? No family lineage?" "I am without a pack, my king. I am but a servant of your household." Cassian's gaze dropped to her forearms. The sleeves of her cheap wool dress were torn where Leo had clawed at her. 5 distinct bloody half-moons marred her pale skin. A low, involuntary rumble vibrated in Cassian's chest. It wasn't anger directed at her. It was the instinctual distress of an alpha seeing a pack member injured, compounded by the fact that his own blood had caused it. "He hurt you," Cassian stated, reaching out a large calloused hand. Luna flinched violently, pulling back just a millimeter before she caught herself. Cassian's hand froze in midair. He saw the pure, unadulterated panic flash in her eyes, the flinch of a woman who expected a blow, not assistance. The king's jaw set harder, his eyes darkening with a sudden, fierce protectiveness he couldn't quite explain. "I am fine, sire," Luna whispered quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It is a scratch, nothing more." Cassian slowly lowered his hand, his gaze never leaving her face. Give him to me. He might wake. Give my son to me, Omega. It wasn't a request this time. Carefully, agonizingly slow, Luna untangled Leo's small, gripping fingers from her dress. She shifted the boy's weight into his father's waiting arms. As Cassian took his son, his knuckles brushed against the soft, unblemished skin of Luna's inner wrist. A jolt of electricity, sharp and breathtaking, snapped between them. Cassian inhaled sharply, his head snapping up. Luna gasped, yanking her hand back as if she had been burned. For one split second beneath the lie in the dirt, Cassian caught it. The ghost of a scent. Lavender. Sun-warmed earth. Rain. It hit his wolf like a battering ram, a sensation so profoundly intoxicating and perfect that his vision edged with gold. Before he could speak, before he could question the sudden, roaring demand of his inner beast, Luna scrambled to her feet, bowing so low she nearly folded in half. If you will excuse me, my king, I must return to the kitchens. The floor is left unfinished. Cassian stood, adjusting Leo against his broad shoulder. He watched the trembling woman back away, her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. You are excused, Luna, Cassian said, his voice dangerously smooth. For now. By nightfall, the fortress of the Northern Pack was a maze of shifting shadows and whispered rumors. News of the incident in the throne room had spread like wildfire through the servant corridors and the highborn salons alike. The rejected Omega who tamed the Mad Prince. Luna sat on the edge of her narrow cot in the cramped, drafty servants' quarters, holding a damp cloth to her stinging forearms. The bleeding had stopped, but the cuts burned fiercely. Yet, the physical pain was nothing compared to the frantic beating of her heart. He felt it. I know he did. That spark when their skin brushed. It was the hallmark of a fated bond, a biological and spiritual tether that wolves spent their entire lives searching for. But it couldn't be. She was a rejected mate. Her soul was already scarred, marked as defective by the moon goddess herself. And Cassian was the Alpha King, a man whose bloodline required a powerful, high-ranking Luna of noble birth, not a shattered Omega who scrubbed his floors. A sharp knock at the heavy wooden door of the servants' dormitory made her jump. The door creaked open, revealing the stern face of Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper. Luna, the older woman said, her voice tight with disapproval and a hint of fear. You are summoned. Summoned. Luna stood quickly, dropping the rag into a wash basin. To the kitchens? To the royal wing, Mrs. Higgins corrected, stepping aside. Behind her stood two of the king's elite guards, their silver armor glinting in the dim torchlight. The king demands your presence, immediately. Luna's stomach plummeted to the floor. The royal wing was strictly forbidden to anyone below the rank of an elite. For a lowly servant to be brought there meant either a profound elevation in status or a quiet, permanent execution. Given her history, Luna assumed the latter. She followed the guards through the winding stone corridors, ascending spiraling staircases that transitioned from cold, damp stone to rich, plush carpets and mahogany-paneled walls. The air here smelled of expensive oils, fresh pine, and the overpowering masculine dominance of the king. The guards halted before a set of massive oak doors carved with the crest of the Northern Pack, a snarling wolf beneath a crescent moon. The guard on the left knocked once and pushed the doors open, gesturing for her to enter. Luna stepped inside, the heavy doors clicking shut ominously behind her. It was Cassian's private study. The room was bathed in the warm, flickering light of a massive stone fireplace. Walls lined with ancient leather-bound books stretched to the ceiling. At the far end of the room, standing beside a crystal decanter, was the king. He had shed his formal velvet coat and heavy armor. He wore only a loose white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the corded muscles of his chest and the faint, silvery scars of past battles. He held a glass of amber liquid, but he wasn't drinking. He was watching her. "Sire?" Luna whispered, dropping into a deep, trembling curtsy. "Stand up," Cassian said. His voice was quieter here, lacking the booming resonance of the throne room, but it was infinitely more dangerous. It was intimate. Luna slowly straightened, keeping her eyes on the heavy oak desk between them. Cassian set his glass down. The soft clink of the crystal echoed loudly in the quiet room. He began to walk toward her, his footsteps silent on the thick rugs. With every step he took, the air grew thicker, heavier, saturated with his scent. "My son is asleep," Cassian said softly, stopping just a few feet away from her. "A deep, natural sleep. Without sedatives. It is the first time he has done so in 3 years." "I am glad, my king," Luna murmured. "How did you do it?" The question wasn't angry, but it was a demand for truth. "I did nothing, sire. I merely held him. Sometimes, when the mind is trapped in fear, it only needs an anchor to realize the danger has passed." Cassian took another step forward, invading her personal space. Luna forced herself not to step back. If she ran, his predator instincts would trigger. "An anchor," Cassian repeated, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out, his hand hovering over the angry red scratches on her arm. He didn't touch her, but the heat radiating from his palm made her skin prickle. "You bled for him today. You took his rage, and you did not fight back. Why?" Luna finally looked up, meeting his intense glacial eyes. "Because I know what it is like, my king," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with a sudden, tragic honesty. "I know what it is like to be terrified, to be broken, and to have the entire world look at you with disgust." Cassian's breath hitched. His wolf clawed furiously at the edges of his mind, howling a singular desperate word. "Mine." He stared down at the Omega, seeing past the cheap dress and the dirt. He saw the iron will it took to survive such pain. And then, deliberately, Cassian leaned down, closing the remaining distance between them, and inhaled deeply right at the curve of her neck. Luna froze, a soft, breathless sound escaping her lips as the King of the North inhaled her true scent. Cassian closed his eyes, his chest expanding as he drew in the scent hidden beneath the caustic layer of lye and cheap soap. It was faint, buried under years of deliberate suppression, but to his heightened alpha senses, it was as deafening as a thunderclap. Lavender, sun-warmed earth, rain. It wasn't just a pleasant aroma. It was a biological key turning in a lock that had been frozen shut for 3 years. His wolf, a massive, scarred beast that had been dormant and grieving in the recesses of his mind, suddenly rose, shaking off the ash of the past. It let out a deafening, possessive howl that echoed through the king's very bones. "Mate." Cassian's hands, resting on the arms of her chair, gripped the wood tight enough to splinter the mahogany. He had to use every ounce of his legendary iron will to stop himself from burying his face in the crook of her neck, from dragging his teeth over her pulse point to claim what the moon goddess had suddenly dropped at his feet. But he felt her trembling. Beneath his towering frame, Luna was shaking like a leaf caught in a gale. Her heart was a frantic, terrifying drumbeat against her ribs. She wasn't experiencing the euphoric pull of the mate bond. She was drowning in the sheer, unadulterated terror of a prey animal cornered by an apex predator. Slowly, agonizingly, Cassian pulled back. He opened his eyes. They had bled from their usual glacial blue into a luminous, piercing gold, the physical manifestation of his wolf pressing against the surface. He saw the color drain completely from Luna's face as she registered the golden stare. "My king," she gasped, her voice breaking. She tried to scramble backward, but the chair trapped her. "Please, I have done nothing." "Quiet," Cassian rasped. The command wasn't harsh. It was strained, completely lacking his usual smooth authority. He took a deliberate step backward, putting much-needed space between them to allow her to breathe. The sudden absence of his body heat made Luna shiver violently. Cassian turned away, running a hand through his dark hair, his broad shoulders rising and falling with heavy, controlled breaths. The political and personal ramifications crashed over him like a tidal wave. She was a servant, a rejected Omega, and yet she was the only one who could soothe his broken air, and the only woman whose scent made his blood sing. "You will not return to the servants' quarters," Cassian said to the crackling fire. his voice regaining a fraction of its normal commanding baritone. Luna's breath hitched. "Sire, you are no longer a scrubber," he continued, turning back to face her. His eyes had returned to blue, but a dangerous ring of gold remained around his irises. "As of this moment, you are the personal caregiver to the Crown Prince. You will reside in the royal wing. Your belongings will be moved tonight." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Luna's chest. No, please, Your Majesty. I'm a floor scrubber. I'm not trained for—" "You calmed a feral air in mid-shift without a single drop of sedative," Cassian interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "My top physicians have failed to do that for 3 years. You will stay near him. You will protect his peace." He paused, his gaze dropping to the faint, jagged scar peeking out from the collar of her worn dress, a physical marker of a severed mate bond. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered near his ear. "And you will be protected here. No one will lay a hand on you. That is my word." Luna swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear coating her tongue. She didn't want protection. Protection meant visibility, and visibility was how she had been broken in the first place. But one does not refuse the Alpha King. To defy him was to invite death. "Yes, my king," she whispered, bowing her head in total submission. Cassian watched her, the absolute surrender in her posture twisting something deep in his gut. He didn't want her fear. But for now, as he untangled the mystery of the broken Omega the goddess had tethered to his soul, her obedience would have to suffice. "Guards!" Cassian called out, his voice returning to its normal, booming volume. The oak doors swung open instantly. "Escort Luna to the guest chambers adjacent to the prince's suite. Ensure she has whatever she requires." As Luna was led away, her small frame swallowed by the massive, silver-armored guards, Cassian picked up his crystal glass. He stared into the amber liquid, the scent of lavender and rain still burning in his lungs. The game had changed, and the King of the North was preparing for war. The guest chambers were a cruel mockery of Luna's reality. She stood in the center of the room, her scuffed, soap-stained shoes sinking into a cream-colored rug that cost more than her life. A massive, 4-poster bed draped in silks and heavy furs dominated the space. A roaring fire crackled in a hearth carved from pale marble, casting a warm, golden glow over the mahogany furniture. It was a gilded cage, and Luna knew the bars were forged from the Alpha King's command. She hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the terrifying, electric heat of Cassian's body, the ghost of his breath against her neck, and the impossible, undeniable spark that had flared between them. A trick of the mind, she told herself firmly, wrapping her thin arms around her chest as she stood by the frost-covered window. He was checking my neck for a pack mark. Nothing more. Her fingers drifted to the hollow of her collarbone, tracing the raised, jagged scar hidden beneath the wool. It throbbed with a phantom ache. "You are barren of spirit and weak of blood." The voice of Alpha Tauren, her former mate, echoed in her mind. A venomous whisper from the past. "I need a Luna who can lead, not a pathetic Omega who cowers at shadows. I, Alpha Tauren of the Crescent Ridge, formally reject you, Luna. May the goddess have mercy on your useless soul." She remembered the agonizing tear of the bond snapping, the feeling of her very essence being ripped in two. She had bled out in the rain, surrounded by the sneers of her former pack. She had survived only by burying her wolf so deep inside herself that she became practically scentless, an invisible ghost scrubbing the floors of the northern fortress. A soft, hesitant knock at the adjoining door pulled her from the suffocating memory. Luna quickly wiped a stray tear from her cheek and crossed the room. She opened the door to find Prince Leo standing in the threshold. He looked entirely different from the feral, terrifying creature in the throne room. He wore soft cotton sleepwear, his dark hair, so much like his father's, tousled from sleep. He clutched a worn, stuffed wolf pup by the ear. His large golden eyes stared up at her, wide and cautious. Slowly, Luna sank to her knees, bringing herself down to his eye level, just as she had done in the throne room. She didn't speak. She simply offered a soft, open expression, allowing the boy to dictate the interaction. Leo took a tiny step forward, then another. He stopped just inches away and reached out, his small fingers brushing the fabric of her sleeve, right over the bandages the royal healer had applied to his claw marks the night before. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken a coherent sentence in 6 months. His voice was a raspy, fragile sound that shattered Luna's heart into a million pieces. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back, offering him a gentle, reassuring smile. "There is nothing to be sorry for, little wolf," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "The dark is scary sometimes, but you are safe now." Leo hesitated, his lower lip trembling. Then, with a sudden, desperate movement, he stepped forward and buried his face in her shoulder, wrapping his small arms around her neck. Luna let out a shaky breath and wrapped her arms around him, resting her chin on his soft hair. She released a tiny fraction of her maternal scent, the lavender and rain, letting it wash over the boy like a soothing balm. He melted against her, his breathing evening out instantly. From the shadows of the hallway, unnoticed by both of them, Cassian stood perfectly still. He had come to check on his son, only to witness a miracle. He watched the broken Omega hold his shattered son, the two of them finding solace in each other's fractured pieces. A fierce, territorial growl rumbled in the back of Cassian's throat. She was healing his heir. She was meant to be his. And heaven help anyone who tried to take her away or remind her of the pain she had suffered. But even as the Alpha King made his silent vow, the political gears of the Northern Pack were already grinding. In the lower levels of the fortress, whispers were spreading. The king had elevated a scrubber to the royal wing. And in a pack that valued strength, bloodline, and dominance above all else, an Omega in the king's inner circle was not just an anomaly. It was a target. The council room was a circular chamber built entirely of black stone, designed to intimidate and project the absolute, unyielding power of the Alpha King. 12 high-backed iron chairs surrounded a massive oak table, each occupied by a High Lord of the Northern Territories. Cassian sat at the head, his expression a mask of hardened ice. The air was thick with the scent of posturing alphas and betas, a suffocating blend of pine, ozone, and old leather. "The preparations for the Equinox Summit are progressing, sire," Lord Vane, an older alpha with silvering hair and a sharp fox-like face, reported smoothly. "The delegations from the Eastern and Western packs will arrive by week's end." "And the southern border?" Cassian asked, his voice low and dangerous, a constant reminder of the territory where his late queen had been ambushed. "Quiet, sire," General Kale replied from his left. "But there is a matter of internal optics regarding the summit that the council wishes to address." Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly, Kyle." It was Lord Vane who answered, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the heavy wood. "It concerns the Crown Prince, Your Majesty. Rumors have reached the lower courts that a new caregiver has been assigned to His Royal Highness." Vane's lip curled slightly on the word caregiver. "A servant, an Omega with no pack lineage, and, from what my spies tell me, the scent of a rejected mate." The temperature in the room plummeted. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. Several lords shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the lethal shift in the king's aura. "You have spies observing my son's chambers, Vane." Cassian's voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a serrated blade. He leaned forward, the dark oak table groaning under the sudden, terrifying pressure of his grip. Vane swallowed hard, realizing his misstep, but he pressed on, bolstered by his own arrogance. "It is for the good of the pack, sire. The Eastern King brings his eligible daughter to the summit. He expects to negotiate a mating contract with you. If he sees your heir being coddled by a broken, lowest caste Omega..." Crack. The sound of the solid oak table splintering beneath Cassian's hands echoed like a gunshot. The king didn't stand, but his alpha aura exploded outward. A physical wave of dominance so suffocating that two of the younger lords at the far end of the table gasped for air, their heads bowing involuntarily. "My son's care is not a matter for this council," Cassian snarled, his eyes flashing a brilliant, terrifying gold. The woman stays. Anyone who questions her presence or breathes a word of disrespect toward her will answer to my claws. Are we clear? Crystal, my king. Vayne choked out, his face pale, his own wolf whining in submission. While the king secured her position with threats of violence, Luna was unaware of the danger circling her name. She was in the royal gardens, a sprawling, walled sanctuary of winter-blooming roses and frosted evergreens. Leo was sitting on a stone bench a few yards away, quietly examining a silver-winged beetle. For the first time in days, Luna felt a fraction of the knot in her chest loosen. The crisp air was refreshing after the stuffy, chemical-heavy atmosphere of the kitchens. She closed her eyes, tilting her head back to catch the faint rays of the winter sun. Then, the wind shifted. A scent rode in on the breeze. It was sharp, bitter, pine needles, copper, and arrogance. Luna's eyes snapped open. Her blood ran ice-cold in her veins. Her stomach plummeted, a sickening wave of nausea washing over her. She knew that scent. She would know it if she lived 1,000 lifetimes. It was the scent that had haunted her nightmares, the scent of the man who had shattered her soul and left her to die in the mud. Alpha Tauren. Well, well, a slick, familiar voice drawled from the wrought iron gates of the garden. I was told the Northern King kept interesting pets, but I didn't expect to find my discarded trash sitting in his royal gardens. Luna slowly turned, her breath trapping in her lungs. Standing at the entrance, flanked by 2 towering guards bearing the crescent moon crest of her former pack, was Alpha Tauren. He looked exactly the same, handsome, cruel, and dripping with arrogance. He was an early arrival for the summit, seeking an alliance with the North. Tauren's eyes raked over her, taking in the fine wool dress she now wore, a stark contrast to the rags he had banished her in. His lips peeled back in a predatory sneer. "Hello, little Omega," Tauren purred, stepping into the garden. "Did you miss me?" The winter sun suddenly felt as cold as the grave. Luna's breath hitched, trapping itself in her tightening chest as the scent of pine needles and copper overwhelmed the delicate fragrance of the garden's roses. Alpha Tauren of the Crescent Ridge Pack stepped onto the crushed gravel path, the sound of his boots echoing like a death knell in Luna's ears. He wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, looking every bit the polished, wealthy alpha he was. But beneath the expensive fabric beat the heart of a tyrant. To his left and right stood 2 massive enforcers, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on the trembling Omega before them. Luna's hands began to shake violently. The jagged scar at her collarbone burned as if Tauren had just carved it into her flesh all over again. Her wolf, buried so deeply for years, let out a pathetic, terrified whimper and curled into a tight ball within her mind. "I must admit, when my spies told me they found you scrubbing floors in the North, I almost didn't believe it," Tauren drawled, his lips curling into a cruel, mocking smile. He leisurely closed the distance between them, stopping just a few feet away. His dark eyes raked over the fine wool of her new dress, his smile turning into a sneer. "And now look at you, wearing silks and standing in the royal gardens. Did you find a sympathetic guard to warm your bed, little Omega?" "Leave," Luna choked out. The word barely left her throat. It was weak, reedy, and pathetic, exactly what Tauren expected. He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Leave? I am an honored guest of King Cassian. I am here to negotiate a treaty that will secure the borders of half the continent." He tilted his head, feigning pity. "You, on the other hand, are a ghost. You are the weak, barren thing I scraped off my boots. You don't tell me to leave." Behind Luna, a small stone clattered against the path. Tauren's gaze shifted, landing on Prince Leo. The 5-year-old had dropped the silver-winged beetle. He was staring at Tauren, his golden eyes wide, sensing the immediate, suffocating threat radiating from the strange alpha. "Ah," Tauren murmured, his eyes glittering with dark amusement. "The Mad Prince, the defective heir the whole continent whispers about. I suppose it makes perfect sense, the broken Omega playing nursemaid to the broken pup. A protective instinct, ancient and undeniable, flared to life in the deepest, most dormant part of Luna's soul. The terror that had paralyzed her limbs suddenly shattered, replaced by a searing, maternal rage. She didn't think about the consequences. She didn't think about her rank. Luna stepped laterally, placing her small body entirely between the imposing Alpha and the young prince. "Do not look at him," Luna said. Her voice was no longer trembling. It rang out crisp and clear in the frigid air. Torin blinked, genuinely startled for a fraction of a second, before his face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The idea of his rejected mate, an Omega, defying him, was a personal insult to his dominance. "Submit," Torin commanded, dropping his voice into the heavy, supernatural register of the Alpha tone. The command hit Luna like a physical blow to the chest. Her knees buckled instantly, her body instinctively attempting to obey the biological imperative to bow to a superior wolf. The pain was excruciating, a phantom pressure crushing her lungs and forcing her head down. But as she fell, she felt small, trembling hands grab the back of her dress. Leo was hiding behind her, terrified. "No." Gritting her teeth so hard she tasted blood, Luna fought the command. She forced her muscles to lock, refusing to let her knees touch the gravel. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The pain of resisting an Alpha command was meant to be fatal to an Omega, but the protective fire in her veins burned hotter than her fear. "I said submit, you worthless!" Torin snarled, taking a furious step forward, raising his hand to strike her down. He never finished the sentence. The air in the garden didn't just grow cold, it froze. The ambient sounds of the fortress, the distant calls of guards, the rustling of the winter trees, vanished entirely. A suffocating, terrifying pressure descended upon the garden, heavy enough to crack stone. "Touch her," a voice rumbled from the arched entryway of the garden. It was a sound that didn't just vibrate in the air, it vibrated in the marrow of their bones. "Touch her, Torin, and I will paint these white roses with your blood." Cassian stood at the gate. He was not walking. He was stalking forward, his eyes blazing a pure, lethal, luminous gold. Torin's enforcers hit the ground instantly. They didn't kneel. They collapsed, their faces pressed into the freezing gravel, their wolves utterly shattered by the sheer, crushing magnitude of the Northern King's aura. Torin staggered, his face draining of all color. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed primal panic. He fought desperately to remain standing, his own Alpha pride warring against the biological instinct to expose his throat to an apex predator. Cassian moved with terrifying grace. He bypassed the groveling guards and stopped directly in front of Torin. The Northern King towered over the Southern Alpha, radiating a heat that smelled of ozone, burning timber, and absolute death. "King Cassian," Torin gasped, his voice tight, his chest heaving as he fought the suffocating pressure of Cassian's dominance. I was simply disciplining a runaway from my territory. A rogue Omega who—" "You are breathing my air," Cassian interrupted softly. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than a roar. "You are standing on my land, and you are threatening my family." Torin's eyes darted frantically from Cassian to the cowering prince, and finally to Luna, who was still standing, panting heavily, refusing to drop her protective stance in front of Leo. "Family," Torin choked out, a hysterical edge to his voice. "Sire, with respect, she is discarded trash. I rejected her myself 2 years ago. She is defective. I am here to offer you an alliance, a mating contract with a true highborn." Cassian moved faster than the eye could track. His large hand shot out, seizing Torin by the throat. He lifted the Alpha off the ground with one arm, his iron grip cutting off Torin's air instantly. Torin's hands flew up, desperately clawing at Cassian's wrist, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. "Look closely, Torin," Cassian whispered, leaning in so his fangs brushed the shell of the gasping man's ear. "Look at the woman you threw away." Cassian didn't release his grip, but he slightly lowered his aura, just enough for his own scent to flood the garden. He didn't mask it. He pushed his scent outward, weaving it deliberately, possessively, into the faint scent of lavender and rain that clung to Luna. The realization hit Torin like a physical shockwave. His eyes bulged, staring at Luna in absolute horror. The scent markers were undeniable. The biological resonance was absolute. He hadn't just rejected a weak Omega. He had rejected the fated mate of the most ruthless, powerful king in the hemisphere. "She is my mate," Cassian rumbled, the golden glow in his eyes burning like twin suns. "And you broke her." "I didn't. No," Torin gurgled, his face turning a mottled purple. "I don't care," Cassian replied coldly. He hurled Torin backward. The Alpha crashed into the frozen soil, gasping violently for air, clutching his bruised throat. Cassian didn't look at him again. He turned his back on the choking Alpha, dismissing him entirely, the ultimate insult to a pack leader. "General Kale," Cassian called out. The general materialized from the shadows of the garden wall, having followed his king in silence. "Escort Alpha Torin and his retinue to the borders of the snow line," Cassian ordered, his eyes now fixed solely on Luna. "If they ever set foot in Northern Territory again, execute them. There will be no alliance with Crescent Ridge." "Sire," Kale bowed deeply, motioning for his own guards to drag Torin and his men away. As the sounds of the Southern Alpha being forcefully removed faded into the distance, the crushing weight of Cassian's aura dissipated. The garden fell silent once more. Luna stood frozen, her chest heaving. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. "His mate." The words echoed in her mind, loud and impossible. She looked at Cassian, expecting to see the terrifying golden-eyed beast that had just dismantled a rival Alpha. Instead, Cassian's eyes were a soft, profound blue. He slowly dropped to one knee on the freezing gravel, bringing himself down to eye level with his son, and with her. "Leo," Cassian said gently, holding out his hand. The boy peeked around Luna's skirt, his golden eyes wide. He looked at his father, then up at Luna. Slowly, Leo stepped out from behind her and walked into his father's open arms. Cassian pulled the boy into a tight embrace, burying his face in his son's dark hair, breathing in the scent of his child, who was, for the first time, calm and unbroken. Then, still kneeling, the Alpha King reached out his free hand, turning his palm upward in a gesture of absolute, vulnerable offering. He looked up at Luna, his heart laid bare in his eyes. "Come to me, Luna," he whispered. The fire in the king's private chambers crackled, casting dancing shadows against the heavy stone walls. Outside, the northern winds howled, but inside, the air was warm, smelling of pine and the faint sweet trace of lavender. Prince Leo was fast asleep in the adjoining room, tucked securely beneath a mountain of heavy furs, his stuffed wolf clutched to his chest. Luna stood near the hearth, staring blindly at the flames. Her mind was a chaotic storm of disbelief, fear, and a terrifying blossoming hope. For 2 years, she had convinced herself she was nothing, a ghost, a mistake of the goddess. Yet today, the Alpha King had risked a continental war to protect her. "You are shaking," Cassian murmured. He stepped up behind her, moving with deliberate slowness so as not to startle her. He didn't touch her, but his massive frame blocked the draft from the window, wrapping her in his radiant heat. He said I was defective," Luna whispered, the words tearing their way out of her throat. Tears finally spilled over her lashes, hot and stinging against her pale cheeks. "He stood in front of the whole pack and said my wolf was weak, that I was barren of spirit. When the bond snapped, it felt like dying, sire. It felt like my soul was ripped to shreds. I don't know how to be a Luna. I only know how to hide." Cassian closed the distance. Gently, reverently, he placed his large hands on her shoulders. He felt the tension corded in her muscles, the deep-seated expectation of a blow. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Luna slowly turned around. She kept her chin tucked, her eyes fixed on his collarbone. Cassian lifted his hand, his calloused thumb gently catching her chin, forcing her to tilt her head up until her tear-filled eyes met his. "Torin is a fool who couldn't recognize strength if it shattered his jaw," Cassian said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that sent shivers down her spine. A weak wolf would have died from a rejected bond. You survived. A weak Omega would have submitted in the garden today. You stood your ground against an alpha to protect a child that wasn't even yours. Cassian's hand slid down her neck, his thumb resting gently against the jagged, raised scar at her collarbone. Luna flinched, but Cassian didn't pull away. He simply stroked the scarred tissue, his touch impossibly tender. "This is not a mark of defectiveness, Luna," he whispered, his eyes blazing with absolute certainty and devotion. "It is a battle scar. It proves you survived the worst this world has to offer, and you still retained your heart. You are the strongest wolf in my territory." Luna let out a ragged sob, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. The final, icy walls around her heart began to crack, melting under the sheer, unyielding warmth of his belief in her. "I am broken," she wept. "Then we will be broken together," Cassian replied fiercely. He stepped into her space, wrapping his massive arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest. "My son is fractured. I have spent 3 years grieving a ghost. We are a family of shattered pieces, my beautiful Luna. But together, we will make a mosaic that outshines the stars." He rested his chin on the top of her head, finally allowing himself to fully inhale her scent. The mate bond, dormant and waiting, suddenly flared to life between them, a golden, ethereal tether snapping securely into place, knitting their souls together. It didn't burn like her first bond. It felt like coming home. It felt like peace. Luna closed her eyes, burying her face against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of the Alpha King's heart. For the first time in her life, the rejected Omega stopped running. She let the silence fall, and within it, she finally found her roar. The grand doors of the throne room swung open, not for a servant to scrub the floors, but for the true Queen of the North. Luna walked beside King Cassian, her head held high, wearing the midnight blue velvet of her station, the jagged scar at her collarbone exposed as a badge of honor. Between them walked Prince Leo, his small hands gripping theirs securely, his golden eyes bright and entirely devoid of fear. As the high lords and ladies bowed deeply to their king and his fated, unbroken mate, Luna squeezed Cassian's hand, knowing the shadows of her past could never touch her again. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of healing, strength, and fated love, please consider leaving a like, sharing the story with your fellow readers, and subscribing for more cinematic shifter romances.